Before we start the presentation, I was hoping Rick Reevestein would come up, the lecturer for this project at BU, and then Katelyn Tarrio did the work herself and will be presenting those results.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you, Tom, for having us do this and for letting us do this work. So all I'm going to say is to explain that some of you may know me. I used to work for EEA and OTA for a long time. And when I left, I had been teaching at BU, but I started a class at BU where students do work for government agencies. So if you are in a government agency, just give me a call if you have a project you want us to do. So this was a really good project, and Katelyn was a really star student, and I'm not going to take up any more of your time. I'm going to let her explain what work she did.
Thank you. Okay, I recognize we're on a time limit, so I'll try to speed this up. But I'm Katelyn Tarrio. I'm studying environmental science and geospatial sciences at BU. And so this is my sort of GIS-based general overview of the types of things that we should probably be considering when looking at the vulnerabilities with these waste sites. So introduction, which Tom essentially just gave. We all are very familiar with the current environmental hazards that we face here in Massachusetts, namely flooding and hurricane and storm surge related flooding, and these things will then be exacerbated by climate change, so increased frequency of these events and severity, and then we also have to worry about sea level rise. Now obviously this poses a major issue for the waste sites. Contamination can be mobilized with flooding, and remediation technologies can lose functionality, so it's imperative that we identify these sites, and that's essentially what I tried to do. So I had two main research objectives. The first one was to assess the current vulnerability of the waste sites to natural hazards, so looking at their exposure risk to these flooding incidents. Then I wanted to look at the social impact of the potential waste site flooding. So look at how this might impact the communities where these waste sites are. So things like water resources that might be in proximity, and how it would affect disadvantaged communities who have less of an adaptive capacity to respond. And then third, I wanted to just consider the future vulnerability of these sites with climate change related effects. So this first part is more of a quantitative assessment in that I wanted to identify a specific number of sites. And the second and third are more qualitative, just visualizing the distribution of future risk. And then lastly, just briefly recommending remediation techniques to sort of put all of this into action. So for this first one, for the current vulnerability, so what I did was I geocoded, so this was all, Tom gave me a list of open sites and active remedial sites, and I sort of just ran with that. So I geocoded them, graphed them as point locations. I did not have access to parcel data, which is an issue because it's not representative of the facility square footage. So I tried to remedy that by calculating a buffer zone around the site. So EPA does have the standard of 50 feet from the property zone, no activity, so I calculated buffer zones around those point locations and then used that as a proxy. So then I calculated the overlap with those buffer zones and natural hazard layers. So I was using open source resources available in MassGIS. So for the flooding layer, I used FEMA's National Flood Hazard Layer. I believe that was from 2014. And then the Army Corps of Engineers has created a layer of storm surge inundation, so I looked at that as well. And then I just calculated this overlap with a focus on sites with a high number of environmental risks, so at risk for both flooding and hurricane inundation, and then a high number of active remedial systems. So this was the results. So these are all of the sites that Tom had originally given me. So there were 3,772 open sites and 443 active remedial systems, color-coded by the maroon and the red. And then of those, I found that 1,078 open sites and 89 active remedial system sites are at risk for some sort of hazard. So to break that down, 542 of those sites, open sites, are at risk for flooding, as well as 50 active remedial system sites. Now the spatial scale of this map doesn't make sense looking at a statewide level, so I sort of zoomed in on specific hotspot clustered areas to show you what that looks like. So these were the maps. So FEMA's flood hazard layer includes things like 100-year flood, the 500-year flood, as well as regulatory floodways, high-risk coastal areas. So essentially, they overlaid this area with these little sites, and that's how I calculated these risks. So this is Cambridge, so sort of a high concentration of sites along the river. And similarly, with an area in Quincy around Marina Bay, there were a couple of open sites. Sorry, it's difficult to see with the legend, but the yellow are the open sites, and the red ones are the active remedial systems. So a couple of open ones right along the coast there, as well as Revere has a bit of a hot spot up here with a couple of active remedial systems. And lastly, the Cape is very susceptible to flooding, so there are about a dozen sites along the coast that did end up in that calculated overlap layer. And then for hurricane risk, about 794 open sites and 52 active remedial system sites are at risk. So obviously there's that big clustered area in Boston, which is what I focused on. I switched the legend up here so you could actually see the sites. So the blue are the active remedial systems, and the red are just the open now. And so
I didn't quite get that.
she was listening.
Me neither.
The blue here are the active remedial, and the red are the open. And so then I have this labeled by hurricane category, with category 4 hurricanes being in red. So it just progresses, as you can see. So in total, 258 open sites are at risk for both of these hazards. 13 active remedial system sites are within both of these layers, and those are really the areas where things should be prioritized. So this is a list of those 13 active remedial system sites, mostly oil, some hazardous materials. And within these sites, sites that have 2 remedies going on, which I've listed at the very final column, should be probably the priority focus for adaptation measures. Okay. And then, like I said, for my social impact, it was more of an exploratory assessment, so just looking at the distribution, things that we may want to think about. So I looked at water resources and then EJ communities, and I used the same methodology as before, so with a little twist. So for water resources, and again, I was using available resources on MassGIS, I looked at surface water supply protection areas, wellhead protection areas, and Title V setback areas. So I sort of merged all of those layers and then recalculated which of those buffer areas of the sites were in proximity. And then I overlaid that with the environmental justice communities. So MassGIS has a block group layer available from the 2010 census of identified communities. So I wanted to see what that mapped out like. And then I used the same sort of prioritization of sites that have high number of remedial systems. So these were all the water resources, just to visualize that, which I then merged. And then these are the environmental justice communities, so color-coded by EJ criteria, so the English isolation, the income disadvantage, and the minority block group. And then this is what that looked like when I added it. So it's difficult to see, but these little triangles are the open or active remedial system sites that are at risk for some sort of flooding hazard and are in proximity to a water resource. So there are a lot of them. And again, I honed in on a couple of key areas to visualize this. So Boston is the big one, obviously lots of EJ communities around. It's difficult to see, but all of these are some sort of site that is potentially at risk for flooding hazard, specifically the triangles being the key ones near the water resources. So Boston is a big priority area, especially East Boston and Chelsea and areas of Cambridge. Worcester was another hot spot, so there are a couple of sites that are along the river that are in proximity of a water resource, and also in an EJ community, this big green swath, which is a minority and English isolation area. So that's another place that should probably be prioritized. And then lastly, New Bedford has a couple of them right along this river here, or this inlet rather. Okay, and then thirdly, so I wanted to consider the future vulnerability of the exacerbation of these hazards. Now, obviously, there is a lot of uncertainty associated with the timing and the severity of climate change and its effects, but I thought it would be beneficial to map that out in terms of planning the adaptation, just to see what that would look like. So for sea level rise, I included here a table of localized projections from the 2014 National Climate Assessment, so localized to Boston. These are different sea level rise scenarios. So we have anything ranging from 0.8 to 6.4 feet for the fast rise scenario. I mean, granted, 2100 is a long time away, but it's good to plan. Currently, I believe from the most recent IPCC assessment, we are in the business as usual high emission scenario, so it would probably be prudent to prioritize this fast scenario. But I used data available from NOAA, so they have localized sea level rise projections. So here's Boston currently, and these yellow sites are open sites, and these little red dots are the active remedial system sites. And I just wanted to visualize how sea level rise would impact this hotspot area. So 1 foot sea level rise, not too much. 2 feet, a little bit in Chelsea, and 3, a bit more, and 4 is pretty drastic for that area up there. And obviously 5 and 6 foot level sea level rise are pretty catastrophic. So 4 feet seems to be the major threshold in terms of this hotspot area in Boston. Something to think about. And then secondly, I wanted to look at the exacerbation of storm-related flooding. So there wasn't really a good way for me to represent the temporal frequency of this. So it is projected that things like the 100 and 500-year flood will increase in terms of, possibly every 35 to 55 years is one estimate I saw, as well as a greater occurrence of ponding. So that's something to just consider. But what I did want to try to map out was the increased intensity. So things people are looking at now are the expansion of the floodplain. So normally, we have our sea level and it's baseline, and then, the FEMA flood layers are calculated from that, but as sea level rises now, this floodplain has to be reprojected. I tried to find a statewide estimate of this, but was unable to. However, I did find one thing that was related. So the Buzzards Bay National Estuary Program and the Massachusetts Office of Coastal Zone Management did do a study to try and calculate this. So they have their baseline floodplain, which they have here, and then they recalculated that with 1, 2, and 4 foot increases in sea level rise. And they did make this data publicly available, so I downloaded it and looked at it. And so I reprojected this with the open waste sites just to see. And actually, it seems to be that all of the waste sites that are currently at risk are still at risk in this study, unfortunately. So the blue is the baseline study, which is currently in effect, and then the green and yellow and orange are the future increases with sea level rise. But it is quite obvious that as sea level rise increases, the floodplain expands, and potentially more sites would be covered, which is unfortunate. And I also want to mention another study where they are looking at this. So MassDEP, the Woods Hole Group, and UMass Boston are doing an infrastructure vulnerability assessment specifically related to climate change. So they are looking at much more complex hydrologic models of storm surge and hurricane surge with climate change, specifically looking at the central artery and how flooding might impact tunnel ventilation systems. But they did mention that a year from now they plan to release a statewide floodplain expansion model. So that is something to look forward to. And then lastly, very briefly, I just want to address remediation techniques to sort of move forward with all of those considerations. I am no remediation technology expert, so I'm limited in what I can say. But here is that EPA matrix that Tom just put up. So the list of active remedial systems that I was looking at included soil vapor extraction, multi-phase extraction, air sparging, and pump and treat. And so obviously flooding and inundation are the key things that we're focusing on here in Massachusetts. And so moving forward with the identification of priority sites, EPA has put out some good resources for climate change adaptation. And here I've included one. So they have different fact sheets out for different types of remediation systems. So depending on if it's groundwater remediation, some sort of landfill containment, sediment containment, and they list out, potential adaptation measures for system components. It's very specific to the technology itself, but they tend to include things like protecting pipes, electrical pipes that could be submerged, alert systems to shut down these systems so that it doesn't continue to pump out things and whatnot. So this would be sort of a good resource to move forward after identifying sites that need to be prioritized. And yes, so in conclusion, there are hundreds of sites that are currently at risk for some type of flooding. There is a large social risk involved because these tend to be in highly populated urban communities and also EJ communities who have less of a capacity to respond to this. And future climate trends will only exacerbate these risks. For future work on this, so there's a lot of other chemical information and site-specific information available in the DEP database files that I personally wasn't able to incorporate that could add much more information to vulnerability assessments in general for this. And as I mentioned, moving forward with the adaptation assessments and these initiatives for specific high-risk sites. And then lastly, and probably most importantly, more advanced climate models to really identify what is actually going to happen in the future and how we can proceed. And that's all.
Does anyone have any questions for Katelyn, myself? Susan?
Yeah, the EPA climate change adaptation fact sheet, I don't know that that's available anymore, given our current administration pulling everything down. To make that available,
I have copies, yes. And
and it'll go on.
I didn't know it was gone.
I'm almost positive it's not there, but I don't know. I didn't know the door.
Well, if it's gone.
Can you make it available?
I can.
DEP, so that if
Yes.
we want to look that up as a resource when we're working at sites, we can find
Yeah.
it.
There's actually two, right? There's the landfill, well, there's a landfill one as well, maybe relevant to you in some of your work in your firms or not. I wasn't aware, I was with EPA yesterday and we were talking about the GHG modeling and all the models that they had that I want to use for future projects that I'm working on, and I've actually used students will be using these, and they're saying right now nothing's been removed and nothing's been changed. I was wondering the same thing, but
I think we need to protect it. Just grab it.
yeah, especially I want those models. So,
Grab it.
anything else? Thank you, Susan. So we're talking a little bit about this in the Greener Cleanups work group. So that was canceled in March, but we hope to have it again in June. We'll continue our discussions. A few things that I want to, first of all, thank you so much, Katelyn. I mean, what a wonderful job. Just great work. I appreciate it. It is very helpful for us, and I think it's exactly what Rick had intended through this course. And I should say, if Deneen's still in the hi Deneen. We're going to try to do with Rick's students this semester, we're working on community solar and EJ areas. So that's another great partnership and help that they're going to help us with, and see if we can go forward on that. And lastly, I just want to thank Brian Roden, who's in the audience, who actually did provide a lot of that data, and not me. So, so okay, thank you so much.